You mismute yourself after again. Okay, so tonight's shiur is not a continuation of the last one, but we're still on the topic of halakha and technology. But tonight I want to focus on autonomous or self-driving cars because, firstly, it's a very relevant topic because probably in a few years our cars will be driving themselves. Maybe not fully, but at least to some extent. And some of you already have or may already have these cars that drive themselves. So it's going to be quite an interesting few years ahead, I think, for autonomous cars. But the question is, there's quite a few halachic complications that come with autonomous cars, and we're going to discuss those. And there's going to be two main areas we're going to focus on. One is when the car damages someone else's car, but it's in self-driving mode, who is liable? So obviously we know that if you have a car accident, it's your fault, you have to pay. It's very clear, and that's probably in Jewish law and probably in civil law as well. But the question is, when your car has a mind of its own and does its own thing, are you liable? And the other part we're going to focus on is actually the moral decisions that a car has to make. For example, when it has to choose between two lives. Sometimes there's some pedestrians in front of the car, and in order to avoid them, the car will have to swerve out of the way and hit something else. And the question is, what if that other thing you have to hit is another person? So, who does it choose to run over, and who does it decide to save? And that's some very moral and halachic questions involved. So, but I think as part of that, even though we might not have these cars at the moment, it's a very interesting discussion because it does touch on a lot of halachic concepts that hopefully we can make relevant to everyone here. So I'll start off. Does anybody out of interest have a self-driving car? Anyone on the call? No, you'll drive your own cars. That's good. That's good. Some of you might have automatic parking or something. My car's basically not autonomous at all. I have to do everything myself, but that's okay. I feel like I'm in control. So I'm going to start with, I'm not sure where this happened, but in one of the states in America, Google actually has some cars that drive themselves around. And a while ago, I think they've been testing, I don't think actually on the roads properly, but there was one in, I can't remember the state. Maybe it's Arizona or somewhere. So the Google car was driving around and it came to a stop. There was actually a road barrier in the way. And what happened was the car got to the road barrier and pulled out into the traffic, but it did see a bus coming. There was a bus coming the other way. The car was about to pull out. And what happened was the Google car decided that the bus was not in a danger, and it assumed that the bus would slow down, and the car went out, pulled out in front of the bus, and the bus came and hit it. Now, so the question there is, who's at fault? Obviously, it wasn't the car. The driver didn't do anything. It was all autonomous. I don't think there was even a driver in the car. But I think if it was two humans driving, what would normally happen is that the driver of the car and the driver of the bus would look at each other and they'd nod to each other and eye contact, and you sort of work out between yourselves who's about to go. You might wave your hand and you work it out. But when one's a human driver, the bus driver, and one's a computer, how do you do that? How can a Google car see what the bus driver is thinking? So in this case, the Google computer decided that the bus was in no danger. The bus driver obviously thought the car was slowing down, whatever it was doing, and they had a collision. So the question we're going to discuss is who's actually liable in that case? So in this case, Google. Does Google have to pay for the bus, or can the Google blame the bus driver? So obviously the Talmud did not have automated cars in those days. However, there is obviously a source for this type of thing, which we're going to learn, and then we're going to try and apply it nowadays. So some of you just joined, so I'll just quickly go over the Jeff and Susie's about to join. So I'll just go over the case quickly. We're talking about autonomous cars, and basically the Google car was driving along, I think in Arizona somewhere, and it stopped behind a barrier and saw a bus coming, and the Google car decided the bus was going to stop for the car, and the car pulled out, and obviously the bus hit it. And I just said if it was two human drivers, normally human drivers would look at each other, make eye contact, wave to each other, and solve the problem. But in this case, Google car took the wrong decision, assumed the bus was going to stop. The bus obviously assumed the car was going to stop. And I just said, hey, Google, and my phone woke up. It's quite funny. Yeah, so the question is, who's liable? Is Google liable in that case? Or is the bus driver liable? Maybe you should have seen it's autonomous and taken a bit more care. And as we said, this probably would have been avoided if two drivers were driving, because you do make eye contact and go, you go, whatever, and you just go. And that's definitely in Australia. In America, probably not the same. It's whoever gets there first. But in Australia, we're very courteous to each other. And it's like, please, you go ahead of me. Now, as I said, the Talmud obviously did not have autonomous cars, but it did have a similar case. And I'll tell you the case brought in the Talmud, and we can apply it to ours as well. So the case is as follows. There was a bridal party, and they were driving along to the wedding party. I don't know what they were doing, but it was like the groom and the bride and all the guests. And they were riding along. And the groom was sitting on a leased mule, right? Sitting on a mule, and he was the groom, so he was very important. So he was like leading the pack of the wedding party, and he was going ahead on his leased mule. And one of the wedding guests was riding a horse, came up behind quite fast, galloped in front, and he scared the mule, and they had a collision. And basically, there was a bit of like a road collision, but this time it was with a mule and a horse. And the question is, who was liable, in that case? Now, you might say to yourself, well, hang on a second. They're riding along the street. It's public land. Everyone could do what they want. What's the difference? So the horse came up and scared the mule, and they had a collision. Really, it's not the horse rider's fault. On the other hand, the groom might say, well, hang on a second. I'm just minding my own business up front. You came and, sort of scared me from behind, and you should have known that the mule was a bit slower than a horse and just been a bit more careful. So, who is actually liable in this case? And you can see this coming, very applicable to our Google car coming along. You can see how it's going to be relevant. So, the Talmud doesn't have to discuss cars. We could talk about mules and still come to the same conclusion. So the question is, who is liable? Is the horse rider liable for coming up, scaring the mule and having a collision? So there's three rabbis I'm going to bring just to explain the answer. And obviously there's lots of opinions, but they basically all agree to an extent that it's really the horse rider that was liable, the guy coming from behind. So he says, even in a public place, even if you're on a public road, you do have to take care and make sure that you could stop your horse in time or your car in time to not hit the other car. And of course, that's our rules in Victoria as well. It also, the other rabbi says, and this is based on the Gemara, but you can see how it's relevant to today. If you're riding a horse or a car, you have to make sure that you've got enough time to stop the horse before it hits the car or the mule in front of you. So, of course, that's relevant today as well. Finally, the Pischei Choshen, which is another rabbi, says that, and he actually is talking about a car, he says that as soon as you turn on the engine and put the car into gear and make it move, you are liable for that car. So it's not so obvious. You might have to think about it. You can't go blaming your car saying it's not my fault, the car rolled. You are liable. It's your direct damage. Even if it's not you, your car making damage, it's your car hitting it, and, it's the gas pedal and the brakes didn't stop in time. You can't blame anybody else. You blame yourself. You're the driver. When you turn on that engine and you press the gas pedal, you set a bunch of things in motion that make you liable, and it's your responsibility. So therefore, with the horse rider, he's liable as well. So I think we can sort of see where we're heading with the Google car. However, now we're talking about the horse rider or the car driver making decisions about his or her driving with the other driver. When we're talking about self-driving cars, really we're not talking about the driver anymore. We're talking about the behavior of the car. It's not the behavior of the driver. So I'm going to show you a bit of a clip later on about a self-driving car, where nowadays, even though they have them, the driver still has to be in the car pretending to hold the wheel. But if you can imagine a few years ahead when our cars will actually be driving themselves, you could just say, look, I know my car hit your car, but really that was logged into the computer. It was the computer system that made it go. It's not my fault, right? And maybe there's a different question also. What if we're all driving self-driving cars, and therefore you've got self-driving cars interacting with each other, as opposed to our Google car, which was interacting with a human driver? And is there a difference? So you can think about that for a second. Now, in order to understand the implications from a halachic perspective, so I'm not talking about from a legal perspective, because I think in Australia, firstly, they're not legal anyway to have these self-driving cars. We're not there yet. But I think, as Jews on a halachic shiur tonight, we want to know what the Jewish rule thinks about this. And often we do find that it does marry up with the civil law. So in a funny way, the Jewish law is a bit of ahead of the civil law, because we actually have laws that deal with this already, even though it hasn't even come into law in Victoria. So in order to really understand if you're liable for your self-driving car, your autonomous car, you really have to understand what type of damage it's causing. Now, in Halakha, there are 4 types of damages that a person or their property could cause. And we have to understand these 4 types of damages. Firstly, and I'm going to tell you in the language of the Talmud, but obviously you could very easily put this into language of modern day society. But I'm going to talk the language of the Talmud because that's how the Talmud tells us these laws. The first type of damage, so there's actually 4 types of damage, 4 key types of damage. And this is Jewish civil law. This is the Jewish law of torts. The first type of damage is called the ox type of damage. What's an ox? An ox is an animal, a living being that's constantly in motion. So if you've got a piece of property that's alive and in motion, so nowadays people don't have pet oxes, but we do have pet dogs, and we do have pet crocodiles, and we do have pet snakes, and we do have pet other things, right? And we know sometimes our dogs do cause damage. They might go bite a child, or they might go and ruin someone's garden, right? So we do actually have an ox today. It just might not be an ox, it might be a dog. So the first type of damage is an ox, which is alive and it's in motion. If that causes damage, you, the owner of the ox, are liable. The second type of damage is called a pit, a bore, a pit. What's a pit? A pit is when you dig a hole in the ground and somebody falls in, right? That's a classic case. Now, we see that all the time, right? You've seen road workers dig holes, and what do? They put those barriers around it, right? If we go and put a hole in the road in front of our house, we are liable. If somebody falls in that hole, we can't say, look, I've just put a hole here. It's public property. I could do what I want. It's not true. The Torah says if you dig a hole and somebody falls into it, you are liable. And of course, it doesn't have to be a hole. It might be an obstacle. So this is the law of obstacles. You might leave your bike lying on the footpath and someone trips over it. You're liable, right? We see it with shop windows. You know, you can't put those chairs out unless you have permission. So the second type of damage is called an obstacle or a bore, a pit. Now, we know that a pit is not live. It's a dead obstacle. The third type of damage, right, so we've got 2 so far. The third type of damage is called mave. Mave is actually means biting. It's a human injury. So it's when I or you or a human being goes and damages somebody else with their hands. So the first one is their property, their ox, right? The second one is the person. The person is actually damaging somebody else. And that's pretty clear. If you go and damage someone else's property, you're liable, right? You do it with your hands. And the fourth one is called fire, Aish. If you know Hebrew, Aish is fire. What's fire? It's very simple. You light a fire and the fire spreads and damages someone else's house, you're liable, right? Very clear. And, if you make a barbecue in your house or you do like one of those bonfires or or some type of fire ends up in your house and it goes to the neighbors, you're liable for the neighbor's property. So you can see a lot of this applies in Australia as well, but this is the halakhic ramifications of it. So now that you know the 4 types of damage, the 4 heads of damage, again, which is your ox, which is alive and moving, it's your obstacle that you've put there, it's you yourself damaging, and it's the fire, right, your own fire that you've lit. We can go back now to the autonomous cars and work out, well, if you have a self-driving car, which one is it? Are you liable or not, right? Now, the question might, in Victoria, if you live here and your self-driving car's damages, you'll go to court. But, it's possible you might be in Israel under Jewish law, or perhaps it's 2 Jews that fought each other and you want to go to a Beth Din, you don't want to go through the civil law. The question is, who is liable in this case? So let's go through this in order. We want to know if your car is one of these heads of damages. And of course, if it isn't, you're free to go, right? You're scot-free. So is your car considered an ox, right? Is your car considered your animal? The answer is clearly no. Your car is not alive. Your animal's alive. It's in motion, but your animal is not alive. Your animal's alive. Your car is not alive. It's not ox. Is it a pit? Well, a car's not really an obstacle. You don't really park your car and say it's an obstacle, right? And it's moving as well. So you wouldn't really call it digging a pit in the ground and someone falling over it. That's not what cars are. What about human being, right? Is your car human? No. Is it you? Well, it's not really you. It's obviously your car who's driving, so it's not that either. So what it probably is in Halakha, it's probably considered like a fire. Now, I know it's not an actual fire. It's got the same characteristics of a fire. In other words, you light a fire and the fire spreads and causes damage. It's like your car. If you turn your car on and your car drives around society, it's like you lit a fire and it's causing damage. So if your self-driving car goes and hits things around the street or other cars or other people or other trees, it's almost as if you lit a fire and it spread. You turn on your car, it's spread. So I think we can safely say, or based on this sort of concepts, that your car is basically like lighting a fire and going out. So you'd be liable. Now, the question we have to now discuss it, and I hope everyone agrees that, by the way. That sort of makes sense? Paul, does that make sense? He's got the nod, okay. So the question is going to be now, your self-driving car is driving along, let's say, Hotham Street, right? And there's two types of damage it might cause. Firstly, it might hit another self-driving car, right? Or it might hit a normal car with a human driver, like our Google car. So let's analyze this and how it's actually going to work. If your car hits another self-driving car, then I think that's pretty much the same as lighting a fire. In other words, you lit your fire, the fire spreads out into the street, and it goes and damages another car. Now, if all self-driving cars are driving normally, really, it's an expectation that's going to happen. So you're allowed to light a fire with the expectation that it might go to the fence, but it might not go any further. It's a reasonable sort of expectation it might happen. So as long as all the cars are behaving themselves and doing what they're supposed to do, then you're probably not liable for it, because it's an expectation that if your car goes out there and meets another self-driving car, then the law of self-driving cars will happen, and whatever happens, happens, and you're not liable because it's all normal. The problem is if one of your self-driving cars does something stupid, right? Either the computer system was corrupt, or you did something to it, you stopped the computer system, or there was a glitch in the system, then you are liable. That's an abnormal type of damage, and you'd be liable in that case. So the same thing with a fire, right? If you lit a fire and there was just a normal wind that spread it, or an abnormal wind, you didn't expect that to happen, you're not liable. But if it's something you expected to happen, for example, if you lit a barbecue and you knew that your tree was too big and it was going to go into the neighbor's fence, you are liable in that case. So the whole question is, what is reasonable and what's not reasonable, which makes sense in civil law as well. Now the question is going to be, what happens if you've got your self-driving car, but there's other drivers, human drivers? What happens then? So the way we can look at this is a good example. Let's say you put a stone on the ground outside your house. You put a stone there, right? It's harmless stone. But somebody then goes and kicks that stone, and they kick it in such a way that it smashes your neighbor's car's window, right? Who's liable in that case? Are you liable because you left the stone there? Or is your person who kicked it liable because they're the ones that did it? What do you reckon? Paul, you're nodding. Which one are you saying yes to? I can't tell.
The person who kicked the stone is liable.
Right. Okay. That's what you think. That's very good. But on the other hand, the person just was walking along honestly, didn't know there was a stone there. You put the stone there, right? The person is minding their own business. So who'd be liable in that case? Like, why would you blame the person? When you walk on the street, are you careful not to step on stones? It's unreasonable to expect somebody to walk along the street and make sure that they kick a stone.
As a thinking person, and this is what we're talking about human beings rather than an animal who doesn't think and won't see the consequences. A thinking person, it's their responsibility because this stone is inanimate. It's just lying there. All of a sudden, this person comes along and they are in control of that stone. If a person is in control of the object, they are liable.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. So I think what you're getting at is actually what's reasonably expected and what isn't, right? In other words, if I put a stone on the street, I wouldn't really expect someone to go and kick the stone into a window. I think I'd be exempt in that case, right? It's just a stone. And I think the person who kicked it is probably also exempt because you didn't expect the stone to sort of fly up in the air. You didn't expect the stone to be there. So the question is what's reasonably expected and what isn't. So if I would put a stone on the street knowing that it's probably likely someone's going to trip over it somehow and kick it into a window, I'm liable in that case, right? So it's going to come down to the facts of the case. What's reasonable, what isn't. I mean, many times we blow the leaves from our house onto the street, right? If somebody trips over, you're probably not liable in that case because there are always leaves on the street. The person who tripped over probably was at fault because they should have been more careful. On the other hand, if you leave a really big pile of leaves right there and inside there are all stones and things like that, then you put something in there that's not reasonable for someone to be careful of. And then in that case, you're liable. So we go back to the car as well. If your car's acting reasonably and just following the computer algorithms, then I think to an extent you could say, look, I'm not liable for that, right? It's not my fault. But if the other driver's being silly, or it's a human driver and there are mistakes happening, then potentially the other car's liable as well. So it really comes down to what is reasonably likely to be expected and what isn't. If you set your car in motion and expect it to behave itself and not cause any accidents, you're fine. But if you know there's some computer glitch or it doesn't always work or there's not enough computerized cars or it's not meant for Australian roads, then you're liable as well. But I think what we see clearly from here is that your self-driving car, to an extent, you're still liable for, because there is an expectation that it's going to do all the right things. But in times when all our cars will be autonomous, it's going to be very interesting to know who's liable and who isn't. Because if all the cars are doing the right thing, who are we going to blame, right?
Hello, you're forgetting who programmed the car.
Okay.
You've got to go back one step further. You can't assume the car takes over.
Very good. Very good. So that brings us on to the next part of the discussion, which is actually, as we get more serious with these cars need to be programmed, right? So as you said, Harry, we have to know, when you get in the car, what type of program is going to be in the car? Will it say, avoid collisions at all costs? Or will it say, if there's a stupid driver on the car, let him hit me because it's his fault? What's a car going to say? And actually, it might get to the stage after this discussion where we might have to actually buy a car with a hechsher on it. The rabbi stamp going, this car is halachic because it follows all the halakha, right? But let's come to that in a second. That was a bit of a joke, but a bit serious as well. Let's come to some moral decisions that the cars are going to have to make in the future. And this is going to be really important. And it's something that already it's been thought about. And I think there are people already designing these cars where they have a team of these philosophers or ethicists on their team working out how do you actually program these cars. So I might actually at this point show you a video, which is really interesting. And then it goes for a few minutes. I think we have time to watch it. Yeah, of course we do. We've got time to watch it. And then I'm going to show you my... Yeah.
Hello. Some hotels overseas have a Shabbos lift, as we know.
Yeah.
So you stand on the floor and you wait until that lift arrives.
Right.
You step inside, and the lift goes up or down, whichever direction it happens to be programmed at that stage to go.
Yeah.
Now, you step inside, which causes the lift to, well, we're not supposed to cause anything when we step inside a Shabbos lift, but there's a sensor there that says, oh, somebody's inside, and therefore I will be stopping. If somebody else then attempts to get into the lift and the doors close on them, causing damage to them, who is liable? The person who I got into the lift, am I liable? The manufacturer of the lift, are they liable? The guy who got squashed in the door, is he liable?
That's interesting.
Who got damaged? The person getting in the lift.
Thank you.
The person getting into the lift, he got hurt because the doors closed on him.
Right. Well, I think Shabbos lifts are different because there is an expectation of how they operate, which is you're not supposed to go in them when they're closing. So I think the manufacturer will say, we've clearly installed the Shabbos lift. In fact, there's usually signs around it going, once it starts beeping, do not go in those doors because they won't know you're there, right? The doors have no sensors on them. So I think in that case, this is all about, liability, which is basically the manufacturers will say, it's reasonably likely, or we didn't expect anyone to get in the lift when we've told them when it's beeping, don't go in. Right? So it probably wouldn't fly in Australia because we've never heard of Shabbos lifts, and also here manufacturers are always liable. You're going to consider them for anything. But I think in Israel it wouldn't apply because there's an expectation that you do not go in that lift when it's opening. So where you come down to is, was there a sign there that said don't go in when it's beeping, and was the beeping motion working? Right? Yeah.
Then wouldn't you have a similar situation with a computer-controlled motor car?
Yeah.
Where when it becomes commonplace on the road, then people will take precautions, not knowing whether the car is computer-controlled or human-controlled, and people will then be more cautious. But in today's age, where you might have one or two in a whole country running around, People have no idea, and therefore they are not. You can't expect them to be cautious. They would expect it to be handled by a human being, and therefore react the same as any other human being when they're driving.
Right. So I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is, in a country where we've got lots of autonomous cars and they're hitting each other, then I think you wouldn't be liable, because if you get in the car and it's safe to drive and it's programmed properly, how can they say you're liable when you're just following the expectation of the car manufacturer? It could be there'll be a fight above by the insurance companies, but from your purposes, which is what we care about, you're not liable. Whereas if you've got the only car on the road and there's humans involved and there's no expectation it's actually going to run properly because it hasn't been tested, then of course you're liable, because there's an expectation that you need to take extra care. So it really comes down to a matter of fact. There's not a clear cut. It's very grey. It's going to be, you have to go to a bit thin and then go through the facts about what was expected and what's reasonable. And those things change over time. Right. So as the technology gets better and more cars are on the road, what a reasonable expectation will change. Right. And maybe there'll be a stage where it's reasonably expected that you can hop in your car and not even think about it, and it's just going to work no problem. Right. So it's quite interesting. But that does touch on the next sort of area to look at, which is the moral questions. So I'm not sure the best way to do this. Maybe I'll just show you the video and then we can talk about the questions which I want to discuss, because I find this really interesting. So let's see if I can share my screen. I hope this works. If this doesn't work, can someone just shout out to me saying you can't hear it? So you can see my screen, right? You can see the little video. Paul, can you just go off mute and just tell me you can see it, and then and tell me if you can hear it as well?
I can see it. We can see your
Okay, I'm
whole
going to start
screen.
playing. If you can't hear it, just shout out, because I want you to see this. Can you hear it?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Good.
Imagine you're driving down a country road and a whole gang of people jump out in front of your car. There's an escaped convict, a toddler, a mother with a baby, a 95-year-old war veteran, and a small kitten called Pickle. You can't brake or swerve, and you're going to kill one of them. Which do you pick?
The answer is, of course, you probably won't have time to make a considered judgment. You're just going to react on instinct. But what if you did have time? The technology of driverless cars or autonomous vehicles may give us time to make these difficult choices. And of course, there are no easy answers. The question is, what sort of ethical framework should we program into autonomous vehicles? To illustrate some of the dilemmas involved, we've recreated here a famous thought experiment called the Trolley Problem.
Down this stretch of track, a runaway train is about to career. In its path are 5 unsuspecting people who will all die if the train hits them. But there's a switch. It will divert the train onto another track, saving the 5, but condemning 1 unsuspecting person to certain death. In essence, you have to decide, do you kill 1 person who's not in peril to save 5 who are? So, will random passers-by flick the switch or not?
Okay, we're going to start it. I'm going to start the train. Okay, ready? Train's oh, you moved it. You switched it. Yes, last minute intervention. He's going to die.
Sorry.
You've intervened. I have to. You have to intervene.
Yeah. Most researchers find, as we did, the majority of people will flip the switch.
What's interesting is when you change the specifics of the trolley problem just a little bit, you get very different outcomes. If you say, well, instead of throwing a switch, you have to push someone onto the track, and the train will kill that person, saving the 5. And people drastically change their opinions.
I mean, no, I wouldn't do that, but I can't tell you why.
You wouldn't? Would you do it?
No.
Does it feel like a different problem now?
Yes.
What makes this interesting with self-driving cars is you actually have to encode these kinds of decisions in software. We don't really understand why people are making these decisions, and we don't always know what kind of decision they'll make in a situation that we've never seen before. That's what makes this so complex.
This is not fully self-driving.
No, but almost. Car companies haven't really begun to answer these questions, but they're still pressing on developing driverless cars. In Gothenburg, Sweden, Volvo are building a production model available now that can keep lane and adjust its speed to keep up with the traffic, a major step towards a fully autonomous vehicle.
The state of the art is that cars can drive themselves, but they still require driver supervision. This car can accelerate, brake, and steer itself, but I still have to be there. I'm paying attention to the road and have my hands on the steering wheel. When we talk about pure automatic vehicles where the driver doesn't supervise the driving anymore, these cars will drive really carefully. I mean, first of all, they will always follow the traffic rules. They will not speed, they will just follow the traffic rules as good as they can, and then they will drive really carefully. They will have a very good following distance. If they feel uncertain, they don't have enough sensor information, they will slow down. Everything in order to not cause any accidents.
Volvo believes that for the foreseeable future, any difficult moral choices will be in the hands of humans. But what do we do when the computers become all-knowing? It would be possible, for example, if a driverless car has to crash, for it to pick who to hurt, depending on their net worth, whether they're obeying the rules of the road or their supposed value to society.
You could say, well, if I'm driving in a poor neighborhood, the pedestrians are more likely to be poor, and they're less likely to sue me, and they'll sue me for smaller amounts. Therefore, I can give them less of a buffer. I can drive a little bit more dangerously than I would in a wealthy neighborhood. Now that optimizes that minimizes your exposure to liability, but most people would argue, and it's legal, most people would argue that it's very wrong.
There's no doubt that, as the car company's videos suggest, autonomous vehicles will make our lives simpler, safer, and far less congested.
Please go ahead.
But they'll also force us to address some pretty fundamental ethical questions.
Thank you.
Okay, very interesting. So, very interesting.
Well,
So,
the problem is not the car. The problem is the human being.
I think I'm going to just stop that noise because my computer thinks it's still playing a video. Where is it? A second. Sorry, the problem is the
problem is not the car. The problem is the human being, because the cars will talk to each other and communicate with each other, and therefore they should not collide and cause accidents. They will also not drive madly like a human being does. So the problem is the human being, it's not the car.
Right. Okay. So that's very true. But you can see these moral issues coming up, and I'm going to go through some in the moment, because what that video said was actually people are going to choose. So if you're rich or poor, it might hit the poorer person because they're not going to see you. Or I didn't like the one about standing in society. Like if there's a doctor or a lawyer, who do you choose? Of course you choose the lawyer. You know, keep him alive. We need lawyers, right? But, or rabbis go first. But, you know, it's interesting that decision was on the video, whereas Halakha, I think, would look slightly different at that. Because we know that the human being or the human we have infinite value. You can't judge a person by their money or their standing in society. But let's go through the scenarios and see how Halakha will do it. Because if we are going to buy this car in the future, and we want our car to be halachically viable, to follow the Jewish ethics rather than Volvo's ethics or which country we buy them from, then we'd like to know if we have a choice about it, right? So let's go through the scenarios again. So you saw the trolley problem. So let's go through the trolley problem again. It's a famous problem. And you're driving along, or your car's driving along, and suddenly 5 school children jump out in front of you in your car, right? But on the left, there's a bus stop with one person standing there, just like the case they had before. Do we swerve and hit that one person to save the 5? Or do we just let the car keep going, right? Or the question in this case is, how do we program the car? Should we program the car to kill the one person over 5? Or do we just let the car go ahead and not worry about it? And you saw all those people in that video. The majority of people would say, save 1 or kill 1 and save 5. And that's what most people...
What happens if that one person is your mother?
Well, that's the second part of the scenario. What if you actually know the person, right? Does that change your answer? I mean, theoretically, it shouldn't change your answer, right? If the right thing to do is to kill 1 and save 5, shouldn't matter who it is. But that definitely complicates things. Or if the child, little child, everyone feels sorry for children, don't want to hit a child. So that's the question. So most people, I don't know what everyone here would say, but most people would, if you ask them, would say, no, kill one person, save 5 people. Now, the other scenario to that is, what if the car can swerve, but instead of killing 1 to save 5, it kills the driver. It drives into a brick wall and the driver dies. I mean, I don't know who would program the car to do that. I'm sure some very good people would say that, yeah, kill me and don't kill the 5 people, right? But the question is, is that the right thing to do as well? So from a halakhic perspective, that's what we're going to discuss. I don't know if anyone has any opinion on the matter or if they've looked at these scenarios before. They're pretty famous scenarios. Hopefully it would never happen. But we all know in reality, if we were driving the cars, we would just do whatever happened, right? We wouldn't have time to think about it. We'd just swerve or not swerve it. Like, no one could be blamed for that. But let's have a look at the actual discussion from a halakhic perspective. So we've got the question of, do we kill 1 to save 5, or do we kill the driver to save 5? And of course, in that video you saw, the other case was even the people that said kill 1 to save 5, they still couldn't push a person in front of the train to stop them. That's murder, right? I mean, theoretically, there's no difference. If you switch the tracks and kill one person, what's the difference if you throw them? That's really the answer from a halakhic perspective. No difference. Right, but for some reason they could switch the track, but they couldn't push someone onto the track, which is quite interesting in itself. Okay, so the question we have to really delve into and is one life better than, is killing 1 life better than killing 5 lives? That's really the question, right? Does anyone know the answer to that or think they have an answer? Pretty hard, eh? Is that no, or I have no idea?
Well, here's another question. That in fact you'd be saving 6 lives, right? Because you're driving, you've got 5 over there and 1 over here,
okay.
So you'd be saving 6 lives.
Okay, so yeah, you made my question even better. Is it a numbers game or not? Is 1 versus 6 better than, or is there no difference? So there is definitely an argument to say if you do nothing, then you've probably done nothing wrong, right? Yeah, Jeff, do you have a question? You're a scientist. I wonder what you're going to say. And you have to unmute yourself.
Great scientist.
He's used to talking to himself. Go. Hi, Jeff. Go for it.
Have we drifted away from the topic of whether it's all right to drive a driverless car on Shabbos or not?
Oh, hang on. Sorry, say that again. I got disturbed.
Have we slightly drifted away from the topic of, is it all right to drive, use technology to drive on Shabbos?
That was never the topic. That wasn't the topic.
Yeah. Well, you see, a couple of weeks ago we said, and we discussed this, you can't play a piano on Shabbos, not because you can't play it, but because it might break and you might be inclined to fix it. Right? Now, so the concept of loosely of whether you use technology on Shabbos or not is not so much whether you can use it or not, but you might have an accident and hurt someone. Now, it's very vexing.
I can see what you're saying. So actually today I wasn't talking about Shabbos at all. We're not talking about driving a car or autonomous car on Shabbos. I think that is an interesting question though. Can you get an autonomous car on Shabbos? And I think what we talked about last time was sometimes, I don't know, I mean, the answer at the moment is definitely no, but will that change over time? Will that change over time in terms of what's allowed or what isn't and what's accepted? It's possible. So I think the piano case and the music instrument case is a bit different, because we're talking there about a different type of work on Shabbos, a different type of work. And of course, it's only rabbinic, don't forget. It's a rabbinic prohibition rather than the Torah prohibition, because there's nothing from Torah's perspective to play an instrument on Shabbos. It's more the rabbi saying, don't play it because it might lead you to other things. And very often the rabbis say things, don't do this, it might lead you to other things. But I don't really want to talk about Shabbos today. I mean, that is an important question about autonomous cars. I was more talking about the moral question of, whose life is more important. But Susie, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say maybe this is the reason why we're not meant to drive on Shabbos. But we're not going to discuss about Shabbos, but maybe that's the reason. Because it would be...
We might fix our car? Is that why?
No, because we have, it's totally against.
Moral questions, right.
Hillel, here's the question. Is there an answer to it? Is there a clear-cut answer to this?
To the saving lives?
Yeah.
Yes,
To this.
you're about to find out. You're about to find out.
Really?
Oh, yeah. No one's going to go away today with no answers. We always have to have answers. But the Shabbos one we'll leave for another time. That's another discussion, if you don't mind, because I want to talk about the life one. So, all right. So where are we again? So we're going to decide now if one life is it better to kill one person to save 5, a numbers game. Does the Torah believe in numbers games, or do we believe that everyone's infinite and we shouldn't get involved? So there's a story that happened back in the times of the Gemara in Rome, where basically there were 2 brothers. They were Jewish, called Pappos and Lulianios. Doesn't sound very Jewish names, but they were Jewish. And the daughter of the Roman emperor was found murdered. And they came to the Jews, of course, and blamed the Jews. You Jews, you're the ones that killed my daughter, says the Roman emperor. And if you don't tell us who killed our daughter, we're going to kill you all. Right? So these 2 guys, Pappos and Lianos, moved forward and says, yes, it was us. They were innocent, but they said it was us. They took the blame and were killed. They gave their lives away to save hundreds of people. So it seems quite clear in this Gemara that it's important for 2 lives or 1 life is better to kill 1 than to kill 100. That's what it seems like from this story. It is a numbers game. However, now that we've established that numbers are important, in what context does that work? And I'll say this really clearly so we understand it. If it's true that you can kill 1 person to save 5, theoretically, we could take any person off the street, cut them up, and donate their organs and save 6 people's lives, right? If numbers are important, then there's nothing wrong with me plucking a guy off the street and saying, sorry, mate, you're chosen to save these 10 people. I'm going to give your heart over here, your lungs over here, your feet over here, your eyes over here. Right? True? Everyone agree with that? If you say the numbers work, it's a numbers game, then you have no problem doing that. But as you know, we don't do that, right? We don't murder people, and we definitely don't have that moral society. I think there was once a philosopher that thought that was a good idea, by the way. I think there's some article about it somewhere, but from a halachic perspective, definitely, and definitely from an Australian law perspective, you can't go, sorry, 6 lives are more important than 1, we're going to kill you and save all these people. So it's very clear. So obviously, even though it's a numbers game, there are some parameters around it, right? There are some parameters. So what are these parameters? So this is the source for saving lives. I'm going to give you this example. Let's say there's a terrorist around a group of 100 Jews, right? And say, look, we're going to kill you all, but if you give us 1 of you, we'll save you all. We just want to kill a Jew. Give us 1 Jew. I don't know why I'm saying Jew, but that's the story of the Gemara. Could be anybody, right? Give us 1 of your group, and we'll save everybody else. So a similar thing happened in the times of the Gemara, where there was a group of, the Gemara calls them idolaters, but let's say there was a group of hoodlums. Don't know why they call them idolaters. Maybe in those days idolaters were hoodlums. And they said, give us 1 and we'll kill you all. The halakha is you cannot give up 1 person to save everybody else, right? Because let's say as a group here, who am I going to choose, right? I don't know who to choose, right? I'm going to like you all equally. Who am I going to give, whose life am I going to give away? So the Torah tells us you can't just give somebody else up. However, if they say, give us David over there, there's no David in our call, give us David, right? And they say, we want David, then you are allowed to give the person up because they've been selected by the people. So from this Gemara, we see that you cannot give up somebody to save many lives. And the only reason that the Roman story occurred was because those people decided to give their own life away, right? They were martyrs. They said, we will give our lives away, but it's not like we chose them and said, we're choosing you to take the rap for us. We can't do that. If somebody wants to step forward, no problem, but we can't choose people. So really, Henry, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay, go for it.
It's very interesting. Just at the very moment, there's been a debate about all those Palestinians that have been released to save 1 person. That was that Gilad, and there was a bomb in Israel, and this young Australian girl was murdered or killed, and now they want that one of them, the woman, she was jailed for 3 lives, but she's been released and she is now free in Jordan. Now, it's a very similar thing. You know, it's hard to.
Very, yeah. So what you've just asked is exactly the same question, which is, you know, can we allow, you know, do we save one life? Let's put you back on mute because it was a bit noisy. But do we save one life to save, you know, do we let all these Palestinians go who probably murder other people to save one Jewish life? And we know at the time that, you know, obviously the government did its own political things, but they did definitely ask the rabbis at the time, and they asked the chief rabbis of Israel, and there was actually a very hot debate about that, whether we could do it or not. And in the end, one of the key decisions was, even though we shouldn't really be doing it because really you're allowing murderers back on the street, one of the things was, for a Jewish soldier, we always try to get them back no matter what. And the reason is because we need to build up their morale. In other words, if you're a soldier on the front line, right, if you think that the government's not going to help get you back, you're going to go, I'm not going to take any risks. I'm just going to run back and retreat, right? But if every Jewish Sahel soldier knows that the government will do whatever it takes to get you back, they're going to fight for their lives and go forward. So I think it's a very interesting scenario, that, and not exactly the same, because there it's real life and death situation, obviously, and you know we have no place to talk about what they've done and what they haven't done. But definitely, Karen, your question is topical, and it's a question that was raised by the rabbis, and each one wrote their own opinion about it. And whether the government followed it or not, I don't know. I don't remember. They probably didn't care too much what the rabbis thought, because politics is always more important. But yeah, very, very topical. So just back to our scenario here. We've got the volunteers. In other words, so we can't give away somebody's life to save somebody else. So if you apply that to our situation of the car, theoretically, we should not be swerving our car to save one person, to kill one person to save 5, because it's not our job to decide that that person should die and these people should live. So theoretically, we should just let the car just go forward into the crowd and not do anything. It's not our job. That's what it seems like, right? Because basically by swerving into one person, we are choosing that person to die, and we have no right to do that. It's almost the same as saying, I'm going to kill this person on the street, take his organs and save 6 people. You can't do that. However, there's always a however. We can actually make a difference between the two scenarios, and this is a really, really important thing to think about. And I'll give you a real life scenario after about what happened. So there's a famous rabbi, the Chazon Ish, who is now passed away, but he was a modern day rabbi in Bnei Brak and one of the leaders in Halakha. So he had a very novel approach to this whole situation. And his approach was as follows. When you have a crowd of people and they say, give us one person and we'll save everybody else, that is an act of murder. In other words, you are giving someone to be murdered to save 5 other people. When you move the track in this situation, you are killing one person to save 5. You can't do that. But he says, I'll give you a different scenario. He says there's an arrow that's flying in the air, right? And it somehow can land and kill 5 people. I don't know how. It's a very special arrow. It can go through 5 people. I don't know how it works. Maybe it's a bomb arrow. I don't know. But you can divert the arrow away from those people, and it goes and kills one other person. He says that is a different act to murdering, because in that case, you're saving a life. So he says, even though, yes, you are murdering the other person, your whole intention there is to actually save somebody's life. So by moving the arrow to somebody else, he doesn't consider that an act of murder. He says that is an act of saving lives. And yes, by the fact you save somebody else dies, that's true, but your action is not murder, it's saving a life. Now, how did this play out? Why was he talking about this? I mean, I don't think they asked about autonomous cars. This is what actually occurred. This story happened in Bnei Brak, where there was a taxi driver from Haifa, and he was driving his car, and his brakes failed, and he was swerving towards a bunch of people. I don't know exactly what it was. There's a group of people that were in front of his taxi, and his brakes failed. And the taxi driver actually swerved his car into a bus stop and killed one person and saved everybody else. And the taxi driver, I mean, obviously you can't judge the guy because it was probably a last-minute decision and he wasn't thinking, and, you know, everyone's emotional. But the fact is, he went to the Chazon Ish and says, look, I can't sleep at night. I want to know if I did the right thing or not. You know, am I a murderer or did I do the right thing? Now, the Chazon Ish this is obviously a very hard decision to make, because you obviously got to make someone, you could ruin somebody's life and say, yeah, you're a murderer, sorry, you made the wrong decision. So the Chazon Ish said the words efshar. Efshar means it's possible. He says it's possible what you did could have been the right thing, because what you did was you didn't murder the other person, you saved the other people's lives. The way you look at it is you saved someone's life, therefore it's okay. And that's different to the scenario where you actually give somebody up. In that case, you're not saving his life, right? You're actually killing somebody, saying, here it is, take him, you're going to kill him. Whereas in this case, he moved the arrow or moved the car or swerved the car and saved somebody's life. So back to our autonomous car. So that's the taxi driver, by the way. So possibly he wasn't a murderer. I'm not sure if he was held, culpable driving. Probably he should be liable for having tricks. But the question for us is, in your autonomous car, firstly, how should it be programmed? Henry, you have a question?
Yes, I'm just thinking, in the old days, bread and milk and all that were delivered by horse and cart, and usually the horse just made its way home or did all the things, and usually the baker or the milkman fell asleep, and the horse would drive on home. And I used to turn the horse around, so it went the other way when I was where I lived. Anyway, that's beside the point. But what would happen if that horse ran over someone or hurt someone? Is it whose fault is it there?
I think that's. I'll be back on mute. It's clearly the horse, because. Yeah, it's clearly you, the owner of the horse, because what you've done there is, it's like I said before, you've lit a fire and you've let it spread, and it's reasonable to expect that your horse might go and run somebody over and cause damage, right? So I think in that case, you're definitely liable. So good question though. Sorry, I don't remember horses delivering my milk, but it's a good question. But and it's the same with autonomous cars. It's the same thing. So just to summarize quickly, and I'll give you the last scenario, which is basically in your autonomous car, how is it going to be programmed? And it sounds like from the Chazon Ish, you could probably say you could program your car. If you're saving somebody's life, you could program it to actually swerve and kill one person instead of 5, because in that case, it's not a numbers game. We're actually saving somebody's life in that case. You're not murdering somebody, you're saving the other people. Right? Now, I don't know how that plays out with murdering someone to get their organs. It's a bit far-fetched to work that out. That's a bit harder to understand. But he's saying that maybe by the fact that you're swerving your car to save somebody, it's different to actually swerving it to kill somebody. That's really what he's saying. And I think, when these cars do come out, and I saw our esteemed member, Alan Finkel, the Chief Scientist of Australia, member of our Shule, I think he actually wrote an article about this as well, about the moral questions that these cars will have to face. And I do hope that if they do introduce that in Australia, they'll invite a rabbi onto the board to give the halachic moral authority over it. So Jews can be comfortable that their cars will be programmed to do the right thing from a halachic perspective. But just an interesting scenario also, just to add on to it, which is this actually occurred in 9/11 when we know that fourth plane that was heading towards the White House or the Pentagon, where the Bush administration actually said to shoot down the plane, right? It said shoot down the plane. In the end, I think the passengers brought down the plane themselves, but actually there was a guidance from the government to actually shoot down the plane to save the people in the Pentagon. And that's really the same question. Should we be shooting down the plane and killing the passengers rather than saving the people on the ground? So in this case, it's quite interesting from a halachic perspective how we look at it, because really shooting down the plane is not an act of saving. It's actually an act of murder. You're actually murdering the passengers on the plane, right? You're not really saving somebody's life. But on the other hand, you could say, just like our scenario where we said, give us one person and we'll save everybody else. You couldn't do it. But if they said, give us David the Jew, we could hand that person over. And perhaps in this case with the hijackers, we might say, actually, these people on the plane were already selected for death. They were already going to their death anyway. And therefore, what we did was just kill them. It's almost like we said, give us David to kill. Someone said, give us these passengers, we're going to kill them anyway. So maybe it wasn't as bad what Bush did by saying, well, these passengers are going to die anyway. all we're doing is murdering them to save more people on the ground, which is an interesting way to look at it. You know, in the end, we hope we're never in these situations. And it's just hopefully just very hypothetical. But I think with the advent of technology, it's going to be really important for us to know these rules. And we know these cars need to be programmed. I mean, that YouTube I showed you was not a Jewish YouTube. That was actually what the world, the Gentile world, is thinking about in programming these cars. So, you know, they're also thinking about from an ethical perspective what the right and wrong answer is. And you'll know, you know, obviously that's a very, I don't know if it's psychological or whatever the answer, ethics, this whole discussion about 1 life over 5. I mean, that's only the Torah's perspective on it. There's obviously other perspectives in the world that we're going to have to follow as well. So I guess, you know, is it going to come down to one day, you know, firstly, we'll be able to choose what our car is programmed to do. And if we can choose, you know, hopefully you'll ask the rabbi about what you should program your car to do or what's it supposed to be doing, rather than just picking the rich person over the poor person or the poor suburb over the rich suburb or the doctor over the lawyer, which is not the way the Torah usually thinks, because as we know, what makes a person is not their profession or the much money they have. It's just about their value to Hashem. So happy to take any questions. I hope it was interesting. You'll have to unmute yourself if you want to talk. Susie, I know you have a question, but I can't hear you.
You hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. A car becomes autonomous when the person sadly has a heart attack and the car continues driving and can cause the killing of people. Halakhically, what is the ruling then? And the driver dies, the driver lives, but the people are killed. What happens from that point of view, halakhically?
Yeah. So this comes back to what's reasonably to be expected. I mean, no one expects to have a heart attack in a car. So no, I don't think you can hold the person liable if their car keeps going when they've had a heart attack. You know, as opposed to somebody who's on their mobile phone, which they shouldn't be, and texting, and somebody has an accident, then clearly they're at fault for that.
Sure.
So
yeah.
Yeah, so it just comes down to what's a reasonable expectation. So I think in your case, the person who goes on living would not be liable.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that would be the same in civil law as well. I'm assuming. I'm not an expert in motor accidents, but I think, you know, you can't blame a person for that. You know, it's sort of what you can expect a person. So what's reasonably expected and what isn't? That's really the question. So if someone doesn't fix their brakes, they're liable. But if there's some fault in the car and you know, not they're liable at all, then it's not their problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's almost like that bridge, you know, the Maccabee games, you know, who's liable there? I mean, they didn't do it properly. So, yeah.
Well, what about the issue about the car, but the last issue of the actual driver? So it's programmed that it won't go for the 5, it won't go for the 1, you're going to kill the driver. It runs into the wall. What happens there? Could you go back to the manufacturer, to the one who's programmed this, says, well, this is a murdering machine?
Yeah, and I think, you know, when it does come to that it's probably a choice the driver will have to make. Like, do you kill the driver or not? And you can see the different types of people that might agree to that. So from a halachic perspective, it seems you're allowed to do that, right? It seems you're allowed to give your life away to save other people. Because that's what the Roman brothers did, where they took the fall for other people to save others. So that would be the case, yeah.
And the mere fact that you are in control of that car, you've got to take that responsibility. So maybe you should lay down your life to protect other lives.
Yeah, 100%. You know, the problem is going to be when different manufacturers do different things. So, the Volvo car says it won't kill the driver because our cars are so good, and the Mercedes says I will, and the Toyota does something else, because then you're going to have cars doing all different things. So I'm assuming, and I was actually thinking for this call to get Alan Finkel on board, because I know he loves cars, and he's also looking to this topic about there will have to be some regulation about how the cars work. There's going to have to be. Otherwise, the cars will just do different things in different scenarios.
So does that mean the government will be the final decider on what is going to be allowed and what's not going to be allowed?
Yeah.
Not the actual manufacturers. The government will have to decide that.
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so. You know, unless there is some leeway. For example,
every time the government changes and their policies change, what's going to happen there?
Yes. Well, that will be interesting. So, yeah. Anyway. But look, it's for me, it's interesting because look, it's still very hypothetical. Our cars aren't doing as much as as this at the moment, but it just shows you that the Halakha has thought about these issues, back then, and they're still relevant today. We're still applying. I know it's a case of a horse and a mule, but the fact is the same scenarios are playing out. What's the difference if it's a car or a mule? Who is liable for what it is? And the Halakha on this, the civil laws, is very complex. I mean, there are 3 volumes of Talmud just about civil law. And a lot depends on also what type of road you're on. For example, if you're in the Coles car park, it might be different to when you're on the public road or on a highway. Or if you're in someone's farm or back garden, things are different. Because on a public street, everyone's allowed to be there and do their own thing. And as long as people are acting reasonably, maybe they're not liable for it. So, yeah, very interesting stuff. But in the end, at this stage, you can't blame your car for anything. It seems Halakha says that once you started the car, it's your fault, it's your problem. And you're liable for what is reasonably expected to occur and take precautions about it. There we go. Well, if you have any other questions, let me know.
Just an aside, I'm very lucky. In my car, I have what the manufacturers call a radar control. And what it does is I set the cruise control, let's say for 100 kilometers an hour, and I set it that with radar control, because you can set it manually or let the car work it out. And it comes up behind a car that's doing, say 90 kilometers an hour. My car will automatically slow down and keep a safe distance from the car in front. If the car in front then slows down to about 40 kilometers an hour, my car starts beeping and starts applying the brake, and beeps telling me that it is now relinquishing control and the rest is up to me. So the speed control then disengages and the rest is up to me. So that's old technology because my car is fairly old, but it's the same sort of thing that you're talking about.
All right. And I assume if there's someone in front of it, it also slows down.
Say again?
If there's someone in front of your car, it would also slow down. Someone jumps down in front of your car.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But it might give you whiplash or something and cause you damage. So
correct, but that's fine.
That's what Eric was saying before. That's the case. You're causing trouble to the driver.
Yeah. Well.
I mean, it could even be quite dangerous if it stops really suddenly and the airbags fire. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, can I say this? I have a car that can drive itself. It parks itself and it takes itself out of the park. What if it parks itself and there's somebody behind? I don't think the car stops. It just automatically does it itself. So
well, I'm going to be careful of you if I ever see you in a shopping centre. Yeah. But I'm sure it must stop. It doesn't make sense. Well, it just keeps going.
Okay.
Well, in that case, I mean, you'll need to be careful there because you'd probably be liable in that case because there's a reasonable expectation someone's going to come up behind your car.
Exactly.
So you probably do have to watch it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
maybe you need to stick on the back of your car going, I don't know what I'm doing. Please be careful.
Autonomous number 1.
Okay. So if we can have a Shabbos lift, can we have a Shabbos motor car?
If we have a Shabbos lift, can we have a Shabbos motor car?
Somebody else to drive you? No.
It's a bit different though. I have to say I'm not an expert in this, but I can see it already being different because the Shabbos lift basically goes up and down per level and doesn't do anything. You don't cause it to do any extra work. You don't cause it to stop or start. It just does its own thing without your interaction. But if you're in a car, I mean, where's it going to go? You're going to have to tell it to do something, right? So if you say on Shabbos, take me to Shule, you've already made the car do effort on your behalf, right? Unless it's a car that all it does every day is pick you up and take you to Shule and come back, like a train or a tram. And you know, perhaps that's not even so bad. That's possibly okay to an extent because, you know, it's doing nothing except starting and stopping. But I don't think cars do, like, we're not going to have cars that just do that. You're still causing it to do actions on your behalf, and that's you doing it. I can see where you're going with it, though. It is possible it might happen one day, but you know, we really have to look into what the problem is. I mean, you know, the question rabbis always get is, Rabbi, what's the problem going to football on Shabbos? You know, I'm going to pin the ticket to my shirt. I'm going to go on the train, which is going anyway, get off the train, walk into the stadium. I won't carry anything. I don't need any money. I don't need my wallet. I just walk into the football. And the answer is, well, you know, I can't really think of anything wrong with it. What's wrong with it except the fact that on Shabbos, shouldn't be going to the football, right? It's not very Shabbos-tic. Yeah? And now we don't. Like, the coronavirus saved us all because now, you know, we can't do it anyway. But you know, it's an interesting question about what, you know, what's technical and what's not in the Shabbos spirit. So that's another thing we're going to have to be thinking about as well. You know, what's allowed and what isn't allowed.
Rabbi Halbron had an interesting one I put to him once. The St Kilda bus service, that's just the one run by the city of St Kilda, stops outside his home. It stops at every stop to let people on and off. The question I posed to him, what's to stop you on Shabbos morning getting on the bus when the bus stops at your stop and getting off the bus when it stops at the other stop? And he said, well, you know, theoretically speaking, since it does that, that's its job, and it's got nothing to do with me, there's no problem, except there's the perception that I'm breaking the rules.
Yeah. So that for us is very important, which is called something called marasayin, which is the perception. And people see you doing things going, oh, you know, if Rabbi Halbron can go on a bus on Shabbos, then I can go on a bus on Shabbos. And if I go on a bus on Shabbos, I go on a train. If I go on a train, I could drive my car. So you can see where it goes. So that's really, for many things, where the rabbis say, look, it's technically okay. It just doesn't look right for you to do that, and people will judge you for it, you know, and that type of thing. So, and things change over time as well. And, you know, a good example is you know, obviously you can't have meat and milk together, but we have these things called soy cheese, which is fake cheese or fake meat even, right? Which is not meat and milk together. But the problem is, you know, when this whole thing, you know, sorry, Henry, do you have a question or?
Yes, I was just thinking when you go to the airport. I suppose you shouldn't be going to the airport on a Shabbos, but they have these moving belts. Does that transgress?
Well, I think that's autonomous. I think it'd be okay. It's going to mute you because it's very noisy. But yeah, I think that would be okay because you're not doing anything. If you could somehow fly on Shabbos.
But you're not a passenger either. You're not meant to be a passenger in a car, in a on a belt or anything. That's the whole thing. Getting somebody else to do the driving.
Yeah, it doesn't count.
It is Halakha not correct.
Yeah. No, but the thing is, you know, first we look at what's biblical, what's rabbinic, right? So from a biblical perspective, you're not doing anything wrong because you're not driving, you're not causing anyone to drive, the driver's going anyway. From a rabbinic perspective, they'll say, well, it doesn't look right because it looks like you're getting into a car or you're getting into a bus and it looks like you bought a ticket with money and you've done a transaction, now you've done a business deal, right? Which means I can maybe go in my car. So, you know, where does it stop? And as I was saying before, like things do change. And I was saying that when the new soy milk came out, soy cheese or fake meat, which is a concept which is really, well, I wouldn't say it's unheard of in the times of Shulchan Aruch because it talks about nut milk. But really in the beginning when they did that, they said you had to put, if you're drinking soy milk with your hamburger, you really should be putting the soy packet next to your table so people know it's soy milk. Otherwise it looks like you're drinking milk with your burger. But nowadays, things have changed because we know, most people know that if you saw me drinking a cup of milk with my burger, you'd say Hillel is definitely having soy milk, right? You wouldn't think otherwise because it's so common. It's so common to have soy milk and be all right. So perceptions do change along the way as well. And that's not for me to decide, it's for other rabbis to decide.
What about the scooters that kids?
Yeah, well, that's the scooters are an interesting one. I mean, sorry, just mute you again. It's quite noisy, but the scooters are a good one because scooters are not bicycles. So technically, scooters are better on Shabbos than a bicycle, and we know that rabbis in certain shuls allowed it for children, right? So I know the shul down the road where I live. The rabbi there said, yes, all children can come to shul on a scooter. But I'll tell you something interesting about that. At the time, people said, look, you know, scooters are okay for children, you know, fine, it's all right. But really, we shouldn't be starting these new things because who knows where it's going to go, right? And I don't know if the rabbi said, people say, oh, really talking about it's just children, whatever. But just as of last Shabbos, I saw a grown adult who's religious riding a scooter to Shule on Shabbos. And it's like, you know, it starts with something small, but ends up something quite big. And who knows, that's going to get into bicycles and cars. You know, you don't know where it's going to end up. So sometimes there is a bit of wisdom with what the rabbis are telling us, saying there's a reason we don't do it. And the reason we don't bring in new things because we don't know where it's going to end up. Now, I think the rabbi that decided that the children could have it, he never intended adults to use it, right? But now we see adults are using it. So for me personally, it's a bit of a problem because I see now that there's, you know, one small breach ends up into something bigger. Now, there are worse things. It's true. There are worse things someone could do on Shabbos. You know, it's not the end of the world, but it's not really the way we follow Halakha. You know, we have to be careful about that. Good. Very good questions and very good discussion. I really enjoyed your questions. Brought it all to life. And I hope you enjoyed the hypothetical scenario about the cars. If you do want any more information, just let me know. Send me an email or a message, and I'm happy to share the YouTube or the notes or whatever it is. But there is plenty of information out there. And it's actually something we teach our Bar Mitzvah kids as well. They love this topic because it's really like, oh, you know, 5/1. You know, it's a good topic for everybody to delve into. So have a good night. Stay safe. Let's hope Victoria stay safe as well. And
thank you, Rabbi Hillel. Excellent.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Really enjoyed it.
Enjoy. See you in a few weeks. Next time we're going to talk about the secrets of the Hebrew alphabet.
Wow. Looking forward.
Okay. All the best. Bye, everybody.
Stay safe, everyone.
Good night.